Prime Minister has to answer these questions. He's known now for 2 years that the family of a member of Parliament was threatened for harassment and other penalties because of how he voted on human rights in the House of Commons. For 2 years, the Prime Minister did nothing to protect the family or to punish the Canadian-based Beijing diplomat who orchestrated the entire attack against that family. Can the Prime Minister confirm if the responsible diplomat from Beijing will be expelled by the end of business day today?
Mr. Speaker, I assure every member in this chamber that we take the reports that have surfaced recently very seriously. In fact, I reached out directly to the member for Wellington Halton Hills to share my concerns. I told him that I have instructed CISA to provide him with an update, but this government will continue to take concrete actions to combat foreign interference, including the $49 million that we have allocated in Budget 2023 to protect all Canadians from foreign interference. Mr. Speaker, this is not a partisan issue. We should do this work together to protect all parliamentarians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it's time for the Prime Minister to stand up and do his job. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up for what?
I just want to remind the Honourable Order. I want to remind the honourable members to speak through the Speaker and not directly to each other. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Will the Prime Minister finally stand up for this country and its people against a foreign dictatorship that has been interfering in our land for far too long? Yes or no?
Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, this government has been doing the concrete, tireless work that is necessary to combat foreign interference, to protect our democratic institutions by creating new powers, adding more resources for all of the security and intelligence agencies that are there to protect our communities, our institutions, and most importantly, Canadians. Mr. Speaker, I encourage the Conservative politicians on the other side of the aisle to get behind what is a nonpartisan cause and protect Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, at least I got a direct answer. I asked if he would stand up, and of course he did not stand up, which is very clear. This Prime Minister knew for 2 years that Beijing thought Canada was uniquely vulnerable to its bullying and interference because we do not have anti-foreign interference laws, unlike the Australians and Americans. And yet, for 2 years after his intelligence bodies warned him of that, he did absolutely nothing. Will he stand up and do his job now?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, at a pretty young age, I personally learned what it was like to be targeted by an authoritarian communist regime. As a Ukrainian Canadian, I have always known that authoritarian communist regimes particularly target diaspora communities here in Canada. That is wrong, Mr. Speaker. And you know what makes it easier to target Canada and Canadian democracy? When we are divided, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has to stop hiding behind his ministers. The vacation is over. He has work to do. He wants to talk about taking partisanship out of it. You know what would have been a nonpartisan thing to do? To recognize that a Conservative MP, or that any MP for any party, had his family threatened because of a vote casted on this floor, and to take immediate action against the diplomats that did those threats. That would have been the nonpartisan thing to do. Why didn't he do it?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I want to take a moment, and it's uncharacteristic of me to express my outrage at what has happened to the member for Wellington Halton Hills. and it could be any one of us in this House who is targeted for actions that we have taken. It is an outrage, and we should all express that collectively. This Prime Minister will continue to work for Canadians, for Canadian democracy. We will continue to stand together and make sure that any foreign interference will never be tolerated. If a diplomat has broken the Vienna Convention, he or she will be expelled. You have the
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Prime Minister is running out of ministers to hide behind. While he sits there and smirks, we have a country that is under foreign influence by a dictatorship that has actually opened police stations in this country. Now, according to a report just out today, there are 2 police stations run by Beijing operating in Montreal as we speak. Will the Prime Minister stand up now and tell us how he will close down these police stations?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I assure the Conservative Leader and all members in this chamber that the RCMP have taken concrete action to disrupt and shut down police stations, and if more open up, they will remain vigilant and do the work. And Mr. Speaker, they will do that underpinned by the investments which are earmarked in Budget 2023, which, again, the Conservatives have said, without even reading the document, that they will oppose. So if they're really interested in protecting Canadians from foreign interference, and that's something we should all be united behind, then they should support Budget 2023.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know why the Prime Minister is so afraid to stand up. Maybe it's because he's ashamed that he did absolutely nothing for 2 years after knowing that a Canadian MP was threatened by a foreign dictatorship. He didn't even send the offending diplomat home, and now he's been exposed for it. Then he puts up a whole myriad of ministers to hide behind, one of whom claimed before that the Chinese police stations were closed, and we learned now that they are open. Wow. Given that we can't believe his minister, why doesn't the Prime Minister stand up and speak for himself? When will he close these stations?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, of course, as a leader... Mr. Speaker, as the Leader of the Opposition well knows, because he was here, the Prime Minister stood in his place and answered 5 times those questions. The ministers of this House also answer questions. And let me say, Mr. Speaker, without equivocation, that the attacks that are taking place on democracy, be it by Russia, be it by China, by any authoritarian regime, are something that we must stand in unison against, Mr. Speaker. That the attack on one member of this democratic House is an attack on every single one of us. We cannot direct, Mr. Speaker, our security and intelligence, but we can sure stand up for democracy.